off. So I am Charlotte. I'm Director of Admissions at Polygence. I've been with Polygence for about a year and a half. And before that, I've experienced a lot of different schools. So I got my undergraduate degree at Holyoke, which is a small liberal arts school. And then I went to Princeton. I went to UMass, which is a big public school, and kind of all over the place. And so I'm happy to talk about my experiences. And that's exactly what we're doing today. We're going to hear from two fantastic mentors, Maiko and Gokul, who are going to talk about kind of their reflections on their undergrad years, the advice for students. And so if you have any questions at all, really no question is silly, really, truly not, post in the Q&A. I think we'll have more attendees, streaming in. Some panels are running over. And so if you have any questions just about undergrad experience, just go ahead and post them. And for now, I'm just going to kick it over to Maiko to introduce herself and then Gokul. So Maiko, go for it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maiko. I'm currently a scientist at the Whitehead Institute at MIT. And I did my undergraduate work actually at MIT, so it's really nice for me to come back actually as an older scientist. So I had a really fun time at MIT, but I was also kind of coming from a non-traditional background in that before going to college, I was actually a professional ballet dancer. So I totally switched gears. I'm happy to chat if people have sort of similar or related trajectories that they're kind of dealing with. After MIT, I went to UC Berkeley for my PhD. So I also kind of have a nice sense of the private versus public university lifestyle and sort of pros and cons of both. I think they're both fantastic for me at the life stages that I was at, and then after graduating came back to MIT. So looking forward to talking with all of you.
Thank you so much. Perfect. And Gokul?
Hi everyone, I'm Gokul. I'm a PhD student at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. And for college, for undergrad, I went to UC Berkeley. I didn't know that you went there for grad school, Michael.
Awesome.
So yeah, I majored in chemical engineering in undergrad and sort of got interested through undergraduate research in biological research and biomedical science. And so I decided that's the kind of field I wanted to go into for the future. So I ended up applying to graduate school programs in that space of biomedical science and bioengineering and stuff like that. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Thank you. Nice. And so I should say I kind of represent the humanities side, and Maiko and Gokul kind of representing STEM here. I studied French literature and history, European history, and so on. So if you have any questions specific to humanities, I'm happy to answer that as well. And so I will start with my first question, which is, how did you choose your undergraduate institution? How did you end up there among all, the many schools you could have ended up at? Gokul, do you want to tell us a little bit?
Yeah, I can start. So for me, I had sort of an idea of what I wanted my major to be. I didn't know for sure, but I knew I was interested in some sort of engineering, maybe chemical engineering, maybe environmental engineering at the time. So I had some school options that I had gotten into, and when I was looking at the programs and even going on campus visits and stuff like that, I was trying to get a feel for, are these schools able to give me options whichever way I ended up going, if that makes sense. So if I was considering 3 different possible majors, does the school that I'm considering even offer all 3 of those majors, or are they pretty good programs for all of those majors? And a lot of the schools I was applying to, they were pretty good for one of the programs, but they didn't even have one of the other majors. So I realized if I went there and then decided my interest was slightly different, I wouldn't really have had that much of a choice. So for me, it was really about, not only what major I wanted to go into, but also the other majors I was considering maybe trying out. I wanted to make sure that the school would set me up well for all of those. Honestly, another big factor for me was location and actually visiting the campus. So I was fortunate enough to be able to visit a lot of these campuses, not necessarily all right after getting in, but just throughout my life or throughout my high school career, whenever I was in a city, I sometimes got to see some of the colleges that that I was applying to, just like take a little bit of a campus tour kind of thing. So I had sort of an idea of which schools I liked and didn't like in terms of the size of the school and how the campus was set up and things like that, which I think is pretty important because you're going to spend 4 years of your life there. And for me, one factor was I didn't really like, I grew up in Arizona, and so I didn't really see myself doing that well for the living on my own for the first time in a place where it snowed all the time, right? So for me, like, I think the weather and that sort of lifestyle was something that was a factor that I had to consider because, you know, the first time living alone, there's already going to be so many changes that you have to account for. Distance from your family is something to consider. And I think all of those are valid factors, right? It doesn't have to be entirely based on like what is the best school for this program.
Definitely thinking about your different priorities, right? Like keeping that in mind. It's not only about the academics, you know, it's your life, right? Every single day. And so where do you see yourself, you know, close to family or far or whatever that may be? Yeah, all the different factors. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about?
Oh, sorry, can I add one more thing?
Of course.
Is when I was weighing the cost of admission at each of these different schools and tuition, you know, in-state versus out-of-state makes a huge difference, but also the cost of traveling is something that you have to consider as well, because if I was going to travel home, you know, fly home every break, the difference between flying across country and flying between a couple of states is also something that adds up in terms of cost. So just something I didn't realize until I was doing the math.
That is true. I went to school in the same town I grew up in,
Oh, wow.
actually. So I didn't have too many travel costs. And it's such a good point. As I mentioned, I went to Mount Holyoke and I ended up applying early decision, which is a smart move, you know, if you really, really know you want to go to a certain place. And I really liked the college. It's all women. I was very happy there. But yeah, that was just right there. And I wanted to be close to family. That was important to me. So I like that you mentioned that for sure. And what about you, Michael?
So when I was a junior, senior in high school, this was like a huge decision because I felt very split brained. So there was a part of me that knew that I really liked science. I really liked biology in particular. I thought I might be a neuroscientist. That actually didn't end up happening. But, you know, I already had that kind of like, okay, I like STEM, I like biology, I like, you know, trying this out for college. And then the other half of my brain that was like, I love English and history and languages. And for me, when I was first looking for schools, it was really important that I could actually find a school that seemed to have both at equal strength. And so kind of like Gokul mentioned, he was looking for schools that had, you know, the combination of these three majors that he was interested in. I did a similar thing where I really was choosing to apply to schools based on the fact that they had very strong, let's say, English and history programs, as well as a really strong science program. And a lot of schools have both, but there are less or fewer schools that have sort of high priority on both equally. And so a lot of that I kind of had to filter based on like, what do their websites say? What do their departments say? And you kind of get a feel for that as you get more materials from these schools. And once I had gotten admitted to places, so I never did the early decision, early action thing because I was like terrified of making a decision without all of the options possible. So I did everything regular decision. And so once I got my admittance and I got the offers, then it was really actually visiting the schools that made me change my mind or be like, oh, I thought this was going to be so great, but actually I don't feel connected to the people at all. So that's actually how I ended up at MIT. MIT to me was like a, I don't know, it was like a moonshot application. I like didn't think I had the technical skills or really the smarts to get into MIT. I thought that I brought in a lot of different assets, which I'm very glad the admissions committee enjoyed and wanted in their student body. But I felt that I didn't have the sort of typical stereotyped MIT nerd vibe. But then when I went to MIT to visit, it was so energetic. The students are so passionate about like a million things. It doesn't even have to be about engineering. It could be about like food, and it was still the most exciting conversation you ever had in your life. And so it was that energy that made me think that, okay, MIT is the place to be. And believe it or not, I have a minor in French from MIT because their language and English and history programs are like as good as they can be. We do have Harvard down the road, whatever, but you can get awesome literature, history, that kind of thing at MIT as well. So it was a really great balance of things that I wanted.
That makes sense. Yeah, it is hard to find a school that has that balance, like where they, yeah, I
Yeah,
have found that to be the
it's
case.
always a little bit skewed, and that's not a bad thing in any way, but places are going to have their strengths and weaknesses. There's nothing wrong with that, but finding a place that really was excellent in sort of both was kind of hard to find actually when I was looking.
Definitely. And I like that you mentioned going to the school and seeing how you feel. If it's possible to visit, it's so important. I remember crying like on the street corner at Princeton for my grad school, being like, Mom, I really want to get in. I just like loved it. I was like, I love the people. I just, I felt so strongly. And I do think a lot of people have that feeling, although you don't have to have it. But if you do it, it definitely helps you make a decision, I think. So does anybody have any questions? I don't want to do all the talking here. So Q&A, any questions for our mentors about? So, okay, we don't have any questions right now. I have a question for you. Your research experience in undergrad. So did you work closely with professors? Actually, let's take it back. We got a question from Lucy Bryan here, and it's linked to what we were talking about before. How do you balance the gut reaction with a school with practical concerns about like where it's located or the research or whatever? Any thoughts on that?
Let's see. For me, I kind of went all in on the gut reaction and did not think about practicality at all. I did the same thing for graduate school, which I then minorly regretted as I got a little older. But I mean, I was lucky enough that I basically got almost a full ride based on need, not like the National Merit Foundation or whatever it's called. So picking a school that actually gives you the financial need that you need makes it a lot easier to not really think about the practical concerns. That being said, I know that it's really privileged to be in that kind of situation where I kind of didn't have to think about it as a 17, 18-year-old.
Yeah.
But if that is a concern, really just weigh what your gut says and don't shut it down just because there's a practical reason against it. Like, I think being able to be honest and open with yourself about, what your options actually are and where you need to sort of place the most weight is honestly the most sort of the best way to be honest to yourself and get what you want while also acknowledging whatever limitations you might have or your family might have.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and what do you think, Gokul?
Yeah, I agree. I think the gut reaction is important to take note of for sure, because that's probably how you feel based on like all the things that you've been processing, not necessarily consciously, but are still valid, right? And I think it's important to consider how you're feeling. But for me, how I balanced that with the practical concerns was trying to visualize myself being there, living there for 4 years. What would it look like when I come home for break? What would it look like when I go back? Things like that. I know some people who had like undergrad experiences where some parts of that were like not as fun for them, were people who, coming home was like a multiple day long ordeal for them based on how remote the school was, and they'd have to like take half a day to get to another city and then fly from there, and their flights were always delayed, and like it was actually really hard for them to get home 4 times a year. So things like that I think you can visualize, but how much of a factor that plays compared to like this is the school that, or this is my dream school, or like this is exactly where I fit in the most, that's really up to you. But yeah, I would say the way I did that balance was trying to visualize, like walk through, a day in the life at this school or something like that.
Definitely. And also, I remember I always tell a story about my cousin who her dream was to go to Princeton for undergrad. So she even went to this private school that like fed into Princeton. It was a whole thing. And it was just like her dream and she didn't get in. And it was the whole family, oh no, poor Helen. And then she ended up getting into Columbia, which is an amazing school. And she had, I remember talking to her a few years in, she was like, I am so glad I'm going to Columbia, like in New York City. I'm having the time of my life. This was like perfect for me, right? So even if your gut reaction is like, this place is perfect for me, it's like you can also be surprised, right? I think along the way. Another question, how do you balance academics, making sure that you also don't miss out on the college experience and having the time of your life? So what are your thoughts on this one? This is an important question.
Yeah, so I mean, I can start maybe. So for me, I would say, I think each year that went on in undergrad, I actually did more stuff and not less. Part of that is I think you get better at school and you get better at balancing your time. Like you realize like how long you actually need to study for something, and then you realize, okay, I like if I schedule this amount of time, I have enough time to go do something else and pick up some extracurriculars and stuff like that. I think one thing that I learned though in doing that was it helps to just say yes to a lot of things, right? Your friends will just suggest fun things to do, or like ask you to join a club or ask you to play a certain sport with them, or go on a spontaneous trip, like hike or something. I don't know. I found it helpful to just like as a default, just force myself to say yes to things. And then a few days later, when it comes closer, you can reevaluate if you actually have enough time. But just not saying no to things outright made it a little easier for me to get involved with things. And then by doing that, I sort of learned that like it never if you're trying to plan out your day, it never feels like you have enough time to add something in. But then when you just do it, like the time appears. And I think it's because we spend so much time like doing nonsense that we don't really realize. Where like when you're not that busy, you still fill a whole day full of activities, right? You might be spending an hour and a half on Netflix or like half an hour on YouTube because you like it feels like you're doing something, but you're really just not doing anything. And then like maybe when you sub in an hour of playing a sport, that might come away from like time that you were actually just sitting around being bored or not doing anything productive. So it always, yeah, the best way I describe it to people is that like if you just, it never feels like you have enough time, but like the time will appear on your schedule usually. So I think just say yes and try things and you will have time, but definitely don't like leave your studying like halfway through to go do something, right? But I think you don't be afraid to schedule time for fun as well.
And I think you learn a lot about yourself, right? Because you're coming out of high school, which is structured in a different way. And, your first year, you can feel kind of overwhelmed, I think, in college. I think for sure it's just a big change. And then it's kind of surprising how quickly you do get used to it, and manage your schedule. And yeah, I mean, I think these are all really important points that you make, Gokul. And Michael, do you have any thoughts to add about that?
I do agree like 100% with Gokul, like just learning to just say yes, think about it later when maybe it wasn't the best decision, maybe it was a good decision, like just try and get yourself out there, like don't silo yourself in your room or in a library because you have to study. That being said, my first 2 years at MIT were hard. I had to learn really how to study, how to be efficient about it, but also know sort of what is enough versus just too much or not enough at all. And that's different for every student and different for every university, honestly. So it's something that you have to figure out and just be aware that probably means you're gonna dip down and not do so hot every so often, and that's totally fine. I think, coming from high school where you have the standard of like, oh, I have to be like acing things all the time because you have to get the grades to get into college, and then realizing in college like, oh, it's okay if I screw up a few times, like, get the help you need to get your grades back up if they come down, and do the work for it, but not necessarily mean that you have to be stuck and unhappy, like struggling on your own all the time. I think was a huge sort of mental shift for me in college. And so it gave me the space to actually have time to hang out with my friends, have the college experience, do spontaneous, crazy, stupid things, while also being able to take advantage of this amazing education and really feel like I'm moving forward with it and not just sinking and struggling in it.
Definitely. When I was a professor at Gettysburg College for a few years, and I remember students who would be struggling like in their senior seminar that I was teaching. And I would say to me, I mean, I understand that grades are important to students. That obviously makes sense. I get it. It's a priority. But for me as a professor, it was actually about teaching them skills as well. And so when they would come to me asking a question, I cared as a professor, like I just cared so much more about that, right? And so I think Mike was talking a lot about kind of your experience, and so is Gokul about like that experience, that college experience, right? And you're learning, and you're not doing well sometimes, and sometimes you're doing great, and that great feels even better when you were struggling before too. So, it's just really an experience, mountains to climb. It's, and that's like the research process, I think. But, and we have another question here. For those of us who are indecisive and have many passions, I understand you, Catherine. Could you describe the process and resources you use to navigate interests and choose a major in college? Who or what was most helpful in deciding the major you ended up pursuing? Love this question. So, Michael, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of started at MIT a little split-brained, thinking I would be more of a neuroscientist, but then also somehow really into like English literature and history and languages. And you can double major. That's always kind of the default answer I think people like me end up thinking about, is that, oh, I'll just double major and do twice as much. And at MIT, we have a rule that you cannot declare a double major until I think about halfway through undergrad. And this is in place to make sure that first and second years really get a stable sort of foothold and start their primary major before they try adding on even more work. Which I think is actually really great because, like I said in the beginning, is kind of the toughest. But for me, it was really just the classes. So every major has these like intro classes that you can take as sort of the, not really electives, but electives for lack of a better word, in your first year as you're taking these like other required classes. And so that is what really told me that I didn't want to be a neuroscientist, because I took the intro to neuro class and was like, I am bored. This is not what I want to do. This is not the type of biology I want to study. And actually it was more of an intro bio class that I was like, yeah, that stuff, let's try that. And so that's really what I did. I went in with an idea of what I wanted, and I ended up, sort of in the right ballpark, but being able to just try these different classes and seeing what piques your interest. Like a lot of universities have these core classes, this core curriculum that you have to take. And a lot of people are like, oh God, why do I have to take those classes? And yeah, sometimes you don't want to take, whatever, Greek mythology or, classics or whatever, but being able to take those classes and realize what you do or don't like about them actually help you figure out down the line what you are interested in, especially if you're kind of split between multiple options. And so sort of taking advantage of what you can take in your first year and the information you get from, as many sources as possible was always, for me, the best, because then I myself could be the filter that sort of takes all that input and figure out what I want from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also majors work differently at different schools. So depending on where you apply and where you get in, maybe look into or ask them how majors work, not only at the university, but also if there's like colleges within that university that your majors fall within. Maybe ask about their specific rules, because as Michael mentioned, a lot of times you don't like the major that you apply with, like you checked on your application or whatever, isn't your official major until 1 or 2 years into college, because they want you to take a lot of intro classes and seminars to learn about a couple of other things, see if this is really what you are the most interested in, or if you're actually more interested in something else. And then after you've taken certain introductory classes in that major and done well in them, then you're able to declare that as your major, and then that becomes your major. So you're not necessarily locked into what you put down on paper at most schools, but a lot of them will have some sort of restrictions on, like, for example, if you're at like the College of Engineering at Berkeley, it'll be hard for you to switch gears completely into a completely different major like English.
Yeah.
But switching to a different kind of engineering there's like a lot fewer restrictions on that. So I can speak to me personally. I was sort of interested in like environmental engineering, sort of interested in bioengineering at the time. So I ended up going with the chemical engineering major because I figured I would be learning skills and concepts that could be applicable to either way. And I ended up being actually the most interested in bioengineering at the end of the day. And I just decided to stick with my chemical engineering major, but added on a bioengineering minor, and took the classes that I really wanted to. But that was really just about what classes I felt like taking and keeping my course load like pretty reasonable. So there's a little bit of flexibility there.
Yeah, that's true. Catherine, I was all over the place. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I majored in like 5 different subjects during undergrad and kept switching from like econ to international relations to English to French. So a lot of stuff. What it was for me was the professors I met actually, and who I really clicked with. And I just found myself really comfortable in the French department. I just really liked the classes. I did well in them, which was lovely. And the professors were just like, I was on the same page as them. And so I just became more and more interested in kind of what they were doing and wanted to do that too. And so that just followed me through. And I'm still very close to my advisor from undergrad. And so kind of speaking of that, Maiko and Gokul, I was wondering if you could talk just very briefly about your advisors, mentors, research opportunities you had, one-on-one research in college, and how impactful was that for you? Maybe it wasn't that impactful. I'm just curious how that went for you.
You want to go first, Michael?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's see. There's a lot sort of in there. Excuse me. So I had sort of like an undergraduate advisor for my major, who I told I was like split between graduate school and med school for a while. He was probably the most like objective advisor ever, because he had an MD PhD and was like, well, here's med school, here's PhD, let me like tell you all the things. So I was really fortunate to have like this great like well of information that had nothing to do with my classes. But in terms of actual research, so one of the reasons I chose to go to MIT was because they have a incredibly strong undergraduate research program, and they get you into the lab like your first year if you want. And so I've been in the lab since I was a freshman in college. And I've tried lots of different labs, lots of different systems. And I would say it was at the very end, I had a fantastic advisor. And she was really the one who made me realize, oh crap, like I really enjoy this type of science. How do I keep doing this? How do I make a living out of this? And so she was the one who helped me apply for graduate school. And having that relationship was like absolutely like game changing, because before that you're kind of in this general pool of like, okay, this is generally what biology students from MIT tend to do. They do like X, Y, or Z, much of which is medical school. And I didn't really identify with that at all, and I didn't really know like, where does my anchor go now? And so having both my sort of academic advisor, who was trying to help me like pick classes and things, but also was just this well of information, plus having Terry, my research mentor, really just be like, hey, like, this is a thing, you can go get a PhD, you can continue doing research for like the rest of your life. It was fantastic. And Charlotte, you were mentioning all these teachers and professors that you just clicked with really well. And for me, that was both my advisors, but also other professors in the department who, one of whom I am still in touch with. He still writes me rec letters throughout graduate school and undergrad. And now as a postdoc, he's also going to be writing me letters. So, these types of relationships really do last, and you have to find them. But when you do, it's like absolute gold. I'm really grateful to all of them.
You definitely have to seek it out and you have to nurture it. And so, Catherine, just in response to your last question, that is my biggest lesson as an undergrad, is actually being proactive and talking to people and talking to professors, and nurturing that beyond undergrad. And go cool. Do you have any thoughts about that as well, or?
Yeah, I agree. I think for me as well, undergraduate research was probably the most formative experience or most formative part of college for me being where I am right now. My experience is a little bit different. I worked where the professor in charge of the lab that I worked in was like not as hands-on. And but for me, the formative mentorship was actually the grad students in that lab that I got along really well with. And I would see what it was like to be a grad student, and they were the ones who helped me apply to grad school, be like them, look over my grad school application, tell me about the fellowships I should apply to, all these things that I would never have known otherwise. Because going in, I had no intention of applying to grad school. I sort of thought I was gonna just go get a job in chemical engineering or something. But then I got curious. I sent a bunch of emails to professors asking if I could work in their lab, and eventually one responded, right? Actually no one responded to my email. The way I got this job was someone had posted on Facebook that the lab that they were in was looking for another undergrad, and so actually no one responded to my emails, but someone I knew happened to get me into their lab. So you just have to keep trying. But yeah, so just like that experience is what made me want to apply to grad school. That I like Maiko said, like I just was like, I want to keep doing this. I want to make a career out of this. And yeah, asking the grad students in that lab, for mentorship was really what helped me. So it doesn't always have to be a professor, but
Yeah, for sure, exactly. And PolyGens, we're all about that. Our mentors, are typically not professors, they're grad students, right? So a lot to learn. And we're out of time. So I did want to answer Catherine's last question, because I think it's a good one about the biggest lesson or the biggest regret. And more or less, like, what advice would you give, to like a senior in high school or a junior in high school about college? Just anything along those lines, just to kind of like wrap this up. And yeah, so what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Ask for help.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Love it.
You think when you're a senior in high school, you're like, oh, I'm at the top of the world. Like, I know how things go. Like, I'm good at this. And then when you get into college, you're like, yes, I am actually good at this. But when you get to college, it's like a whole nother ball game, because suddenly you're in a brand new place. You don't know anybody, maybe. I mean, I didn't. And you're in a very unfamiliar space, and academics are different in college, and I think everyone experiences that, no matter where you come from or what high school you went to, and sometimes you're gonna suck at it, and knowing how to ask for help, like what the actual avenues are, whether that's tutoring, whether that's student support, or even if that's just like counseling and therapy or whatever, just know how to ask for help, like what avenues are there, but then be honest with yourself when you actually need it. Because I think one of the reasons why my first 2 years at MIT were really hard is that I knew what the avenues were, but I was like really shy and introverted about actually asking people for help, whether that was my peers, whether that was my advisor, whether that was these like sort of official avenues for tutoring or things like that. And if I had done that sooner, it would have made it a lot smoother. So just ask for help, know when you need it, and don't be afraid or shy or ashamed of it. It's totally normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So many of these schools will have all of these established resources for help, right? Like they'll have tutors that they're paying just to sit in a room and wait for people to come in and ask them for help. They'll have mandatory office hours for every professor and every grad student instructor who's teaching a class as well. So even if you're too shy to go to the professor, you can at least go to the grad student who's helping TA the class, right? Like there's so many opportunities for help. And I think the people who succeeded earlier, I think, in college were the people who were the boldest about going and taking advantage of all these sources.
Definitely. That's great advice. I love that. It's perfect. And I think it's a good way to close today. And so if you have any questions though, because we ran out of time really quickly, it felt like, and so if you have questions for me, Gokul, Maiko, please send me an email. Charlotte at polygens.org. I'm typing it into the chat. And I can pass your questions on. So if anything's on your mind, and you're a little too shy to ask, maybe, let us know. Thank you so much to our presenters, and thank you attendees for coming. This was really fun, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, the symposium day.
All right. See ya.
Thanks everybody. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.